idea who the other guy is.
And it's a completely staged kind of escapade from Tyson where he swings on him,
Oh
and
no.
they've got slow motion footage and everything's breaking down to where, and then now supposedly, so this is what I was just reading now. There's a script out actually that leaked of what the first round was going to be like and what the second round was going to be like. So it's turned itself into like a WWE. I would say it's a gigantic failure, in the words of this week.
I don't know. I guess you have to decide what the mission is, whether it's a failure or not, right?
Yeah, that's the good point. If it's just
If
to get eyeballs, then it's probably a success.
the
They got
mission is
mine
to
this
be
morning.
if the mission is to be relevant in your 70s, then mission accomplished, right?
Yeah. Did you post this morning?
I did not. No, taking 2 days off.
Your word, good for you.
Yeah, yeah. I did not fail to meet my mission.
That you can approach it, but we did Q Source again Thursday out here at the Merrimack, um, my AO,
Hmm.
and there was just good discussion on, just more of the corporate business side of it, on failed plans, the more practical side of failure. And for me, I always just keep going back to the biblical side of it, that it's inevitable. And I remember Merengue saying that Wednesday at the Q Source, that kind of laughing, is like, is failure necessary for a leader to develop? And it's just sort of like, it, it's inevitable because we're fallen creatures.
Right.
And so, and then you get into the argument of standards, more or less, because you can say that you succeed in a certain task, and then you do, but then from the perspective of somebody else who holds higher standards than you, because in a way, just like you can always reach higher to heaven, there's always a better time you can get, there's always more efficiency, there's always a place.
Right.
See, because you could have actually made.
Right. Yeah, it's all very comparative. There's a,
Yeah, yeah.
whenever we do these, the first thing I always do when I see the chapters, I always go to the dictionary and I look at the definition. And one of the things that really struck me about this, as far as when you think of a lot of what Dredd said in the chapter, goes to like a leadership group, right? Or leading a group to a, it's a lot of what we're talking about, is we're trying to get guys to lead groups to a point, right? To a purpose. And the definition that really struck me was the failure of like fracturing, the point at which something breaks, right? You think like when a bolt fails, that's when the tire comes off your car, right? And just that point of failure with leaders, with it almost goes back to what we talked about last week with the opportunity, where you give people opportunities to succeed. But when you're developing a leader, you also kind of have to give them small circumstances to fail, right? Like, you don't want the first time a guy makes a mistake, you don't want it to be during like the open heart surgery. You want it to be like when he's, practicing doing like a stitch or something, right? And
Right.
and with a leader, you want to find that point where when leaders fail, that's the point where you want to make sure that they don't fracture the team, right? Where Dredd gives that story where, he had a performance review and he started pointing the fingers at everybody, and You know, I guess that's kind of where I settled into the discussion this week.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because the importance is the congruity and maintaining the unity of the group, whether it be that the amount of guys. Like let's take F3 for instance. You know, when things start to get a little
Mhm.
to lose it when it becomes a dumpster fire. The idea is to not allow that failure to completely disintegrate the group. That there
Right.
be something that we can all take away from it, that there be something that we can all remain tied to. And yeah, I never really thought about it from that perspective. And it's interesting because just been hammering away the group. Self admitted ways. And I'm going back to the idea of how powerful we are in groups, especially
Mm.
small groups.
Yeah.
And so that I think is the point that until you just brought it to my attention has been gone over my head of the whole idea. And
Right.
so what do we do? How do we manage it? And how do we prepare people for it? And that sort of a process.
Yeah, because it is inevitable, you know. Even the like the strongest part that you build, you know, time is undefeated, right? It's
Mm,
the strongest thing you build is gonna fracture at some point. And the point of making a good part of the machine is you test it and you test it and you test it and you try different stressors, right? Like how does it react to water? How does it react to salt water? And I think that's the thing as when we're, you know, developing the groups that we're in is we're constantly trying to develop new leaders rather than just be like, you know, the man. But it's how do you put them in little situations to test them, you know, because in sports, we've all seen that kid that, you know, they're the best player in all through juniors, they're the best player in high school. Some kids they never lose a game. And they go to college, and the first thing that goes wrong, they just absolutely are useless. Like they've never lost before. And then they're the kid that does something stupid, like punches some kid from the other team, you know, loses their scholarship, but they've never been tested. That the first test is a big test, and they fail, and that's what I think. That's really what we want to avoid is we want to make quizzes to get them ready for the big huge test, right?
hmm Yeah, and but there is a lot to say of because again, you take the complete opposite perspective of the kid who loses nonstop as a adolescent, in his early days, and he quits. He quits because it's
Hmm.
just zero success. And so, as a parent, as a coach, as a leader, there's that such a sweet spot that's involved with, and it differs per person, per individual.
Right.
The different experiences that they've had, that what we're made of and how we see the world. But the fact remains that there is a certain element of failure, a certain element of just not meeting the mark that has to be accepted and integrated and dealt with during the learning process. Um,
Mm.
and that brings back to me this whole idea of the comfort culture. Immediately are going to get to, even at a biological level, pain. You're going to get a not measuring up. You try to do something, and generally speaking, especially as a young young human toddler develops, it's pain. Your first steps and you've collapsed back down onto your face and knees. I don't remember it, but I'm sure it sucks. Exercise, for instance, it just takes a reoccurrence of failure, which equals pain.
Right.
And in this comfort-driven culture that we live in, that sort of thing is almost esteemed at this point in time if you can avoid pain, because then you're doing something right. And especially as a parent, as a leader, if you can your flock from wolves, if you can keep your flock from experiencing any pain, there's some sort of element of, I'm doing the right thing. And
Right.
it couldn't be any further from the truth. It's completely inverted from that. But to again, to a limit, you can't. The more suffering and the more pain I impose upon my team, the better they're going to be, because
Right.
then they're going to.
Mhm.
And to me, to find that sweet spot, it just goes back to communication
Right.
and
Well,
and
and all
some
these
sort of
things,
a.
they were making the same gesture. All these things stack, right?
For sure.
With the failure, you go back to last week, you go back to opportunity, right? So you give someone an opportunity, they fail, then you try to set them into another opportunity, to hopefully you learn. That's where you learn as a leader also that, you know, that guy's not the guy that I want to do that thing again. So I'll give him something else that he can succeed at. So it's all, I think it's it's very cyclical. Life is very cyclical anyways, but so something
Yeah,
else real fast. The next rabbit hole on my journey through the dictionary was the first definition of failure in the dictionary, and I think this is key too. The first definition is omission of occurrence or performance. So according to the dictionary, the biggest failure is just not doing anything.
a lack.
Right, right,
Interesting. Lack. I mean, and that's so true, because just the lack
right,
is the baseline for failure. That's like nation. And we all know that. Like, if you want to for sure fail, just omit your opportunity to even try.
right.
That's
And sometimes
really cool.
we see that as success though, you're like, I haven't failed at anything. But then when you really look at it, like, have you actually tried anything? I think that kind of stuck out with somebody at the discussion the other day. He's kind of like,
Right.
I haven't really even attempted anything in a long time, right?
Well, it's that whole right. And it made me think a lot throughout the day about which game I'm playing too small too. Like, my own question, what are you willing to fail for, is sort of that's a mental exercise there, because it's just. And you can get cynical about it, because there's a lot of areas that we could probably choose to start playing bigger, but we're limited creatures. But it does pay to pay attention to, like, am I just of that's that going into the avoidance idea of, I'm just simply avoiding pain, and I'm
Mm,
calling that a victory. And it's no, that's not how it works. You don't get the victory just by avoiding pain. In fact, the victory comes through the pain and effort and toil. That's the prerequisite. And that's what that chapter, again, is just reminding us, because it comes right after opportunity. Funny. Like, here you go, here's your opportunity, and now here you go, here's your failure.
right.
And that of the structure of the Q source. How many times we go through it, it just continues to, like, point its way through into the next subject, in the next chapter, and the next point that you've got to consider. It
Hmm.
really is a well written text. It's obviously got its holes, like most doctrine, but it's very profound in how it kind of points us to the next thing there.
Hmm.
Do you Do you have any other interesting lexicon, dictionary
That was, I mean,
pointers
honestly,
there?
it's I thought that, I thought those 2, like, really, struck out to me beyond the things that I already thought of as the definition, like, basically what we think when we think of failure, like, not being able to do something
Yeah,
or,
we assume that the thing has already been tried.
losing.
We assume with the definition of failure that it actually just includes the act of you being there. But it's so cool how that first definition is no, it's actually the first way to fail is by not being there.
Right, right.
It's, yeah, I mean, that's because again, I always ask myself how many things can,
Right.
and I think
Well,
what's
you think,
important,
most of the things that you do, when you show up, you beat 80, 90% of the humans on the planet, right? I think about, half marathons or 5Ks. I tell people all the time, people who are talking about how slow they ran, it's like you beat everybody who didn't even try. And that's, it's
if
a
you
big
put,
thing. Like,
the saying is, if you put 100 hours into something in a year, then you are in the top 2% of in the world at that activity. Is the word is how it's been broken down to me before. But I
right,
agree. Like, to your statement, it is true that like once you commit to something and once you start doing it, because then you can already feel that with certain things because there's a language, there's a culture that you start to pick up within a couple months of starting something new, and then you realize what I thought that I knew, like I've mentioned before, the propositions that I had about this group were not nearly what I learned it to be by showing up and participating in what it is. You totally see what shadow you had before of the thing, and it's no matter how many times that happens to me, it still is so tough to continue showing up to that new thing or
right.
that next call that is beckoning us, and it's just I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen if I show up. I don't know who's going to be there. I don't know how it's going to end up going. And I every single time I find myself getting proved wrong or right, depending on how you want to look at it, that once you do go, it's like, "Oh, now I know. Now I can see. Now I actually understand. Whatever I thought
Yeah,
that I knew before wasn't even close."
right.
But
Well, and
that's
Dredd talks about that too. I forget what what quadrant it's in, but just status quo, it's so easy to just do the stuff you do all the time and either be really good at it or be terrible at it, like you look at, you're unhappy, but you look at yourself and you're doing the same stuff every day, but you're unhappy. And happiness is so close most of the time. Like, the new thing is usually so close, and the first step is always, like, the hardest, right? You know? I mean,
for sure.
I think about I think the thing about F3 is that it was so, like, abrupt, there was no time for me to really think about it. Shocker invited me on, I think it was, like, I wanna say it was a Friday, and he was like, or maybe even a Sunday, but it was like, "Yeah, we meet Monday." There was no time to think of any good excuses not to show up, basically. I mean,
Right.
that's because if I could have, I would have. I mean, but and I think a lot of times too that, that happens where, I don't know, you find your thing because, you get in the car and kinda like, "Where are we going?" And the guys are like, we're going to do this," and you show up, you really don't have a choice, and you find it you really enjoy it, I don't know, that's probably a bad analogy, but I think status quo is really what we should constantly be, kind of introspective about our daily life. I think Atomic Habits talks about that a lot too, about writing down what you do all day and then looking at it and thinking, what was important today, right?
Or what was new? Am I just kind of
Right.
writing down the same? That helped for me. I started journaling in the mornings, and I just kind of rehash, and
Mm,
I would like what I am looking, kind of some things I'm looking forward to for the day. That's what I guess I try to do, but it thing, you know.
yeah.
Yesterday I posted at Bums, mowed a few yards, did an extra workout, talked to the kids, and then I seem to write that again over and over. And it's like that's what did me to join the MMA gym out here. Was it was scaring me, like wonder what this how washed up am I? Was the true question, and it's face that I have to go find out what I don't have anymore. But it was like, what is everybody gonna think? What's the what's all the negatives? And it's like, no, you're just afraid to take that first step. And again, that is the biggest. I'm glad you brought that up today. That is the biggest failure alive, is the doubting, and the doubt kills more dreams than anything else, because you just we run these irrational fears, and the 9% of the irrational fears that go through your head before you enter the place that you were scared to enter, and then you find
Right.
out that all of that's what finding out what it truly is. You realize, okay, there might be something to, there's probably still a challenge, there's probably still a fearful element involved with it, because it's life, everything has its risk. But it puts it in such a perspective, then, that a real perspective of like, oh, I'm not going to get laughed out of the building by everybody there, but I am going to have to dig deep and probably sweat and maybe bleed a little bit. And it's like, okay, so now I've got my fears a little bit more rational. Now I've got things lined up a little bit. The other thing about that is this, you I think the key is to, because you can see even within F3, we can get conditioned to doing something that was once the thing that we were frightened of. and,
Mm,
and then we found the guts. However it worked, like you said, maybe it just was perfect timing. Maybe we got dragged there unbeknownst to us, but we showed up, and now it's become the thing that we do. I wrestle with, how can I make that the consistent set for me, with battling,
mm,
how do you keep everything aligned to a unified purpose, but stepping into the that's where I think it gets tough, because we are destination creatures. We do
right.
a good practice to probably venture down road, explore other AOs, and
Right.
maybe even Q, step up and lead in a completely new um, environment, or stay involved and integrate what is new at the same time without leaving the group. And so, F3 that end up bound together in areas that have been carved out. But outside of that, I guess in the real life, families in our just every day, what are the what are the ways that we can continually incorporate being being fearful, I guess. Incorporate being fearful with new activities, trying a new thing, I
That's a
guess.
good point. That is a challenge between the status quo and constantly chasing, right? Because I've been a victim of
Mm.
both of those things, like just chasing constantly. And I think there's somewhere between the guy who goes into the factory at 18 and takes his gold watch at 62 and goes home, and then the guy who's had, who changes jobs for a 25-cent raise, or moves all over the country. And some there's there's bonuses to both of those, but there's also downside to both of those. I think you have to be really, introspective about that. Like you said about, you know, even in a group like F3, guys who are bouncing all over the place, like you can really accelerate your first F, but what about the second F? Are you always the guy who, are you really connecting with guys when you see them like day after,
Yeah, have you found anybody you can call on in the dark of night, or that they can vice versa call on you? Are you connecting to
right.
that degree with other people? And well,
Yeah.
it's
But
that's
there's
the thing
also
I've
that
been.
there's that bonus element too of, like you said, of putting yourself in uncomfortable situations where you have to talk to people that you haven't talked to, 120 times, or, you know, that's a thing really, even with your family. Your situation's a little different than mine, but I feel like when my kids were younger, I wish I'd done a better job of like taking my kids downrange, like go to a different place, go to, whatever situations where they had to talk to different people and deal with different situations, and just so the first time that they're having to do that, they're not like an adult, like, hey, I'm 20 and I have to learn how to have a conversation with this person that I haven't talked to before. I think again, we get very status quo is safe. We get very safety minded, and these
Well,
are
we
my.
even do it with our workouts. If we do it, it makes you wonder to what degree spiritually it happens. I think we talked about this the other day. We know so and so doesn't like to run hills, so we'll kind of, we all know that we do little baby arm circles, and you can see we get into these ruts physically with how we're supposed to be challenging ourselves, quote unquote. We're going to the gloom to challenge ourselves physically, and we get in these ruts. I wonder spiritually and emotionally, there's maybe we know so and so has a political stance, so we don't challenge that, even though it's not in a provocative way. It's in a loving way. We're curious and we'd like to know more about that individual, but that's a tough question to ask, and we're not going to do that because of whatever reason. It's those sort of bounds that they're unwritten, but we kind of I think to answer or to go back to your point, even by putting yourself into newer other situations with new men, new people that you haven't been around, sometimes those topics are broached regardless, and you've got to deal with that sort of a conversation. And
Mm.
if you haven't had practice getting perspective from the other, if you haven't had practice getting a new perspective, then you can see how unsettling it is for some people, where they're hearing something that they never thought they'd have to hear from somebody in a group that they belong to. And so that freaks them out. And so there's a spiritual integrity too. not going to talk about, or we're not going to talk about anything out of bounds. And
Right.
it's just interesting how we can get into our safety bubbles, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually through dialogue and the tougher conversations that we are avoiding, sort of like the tougher workouts we're avoiding. We're not going to bear through that. I'll, I'll
Right.
I'll hold that for another day. But it's interesting with a group like F3, how even with a explicit attempt to challenge and to run edges, humans will find a way to box it in, put some
Mm.
lines around it, and contain it.
It is kind of funny, yeah, when you get around the people who don't know what they shouldn't say around you, you know?
Right, right. Sometimes, well,
And
sometimes things are just slipped. Somebody says things naturally, and they don't know that that's an out of bounds statement based off of where they've come from. And there again, I
right.
think that's the benefit. That's just the benefit of the second F, and to
Mhm.
truly engage, but to truly engage with it, and not just call it a place where friends can go and drink on a Friday night and say it's fellowship.
Right. Well,
You
there's the
know,
thing where you can disagree with somebody, I mean, I've had really strong disagreements with people over topics, but then when you get right down to it, that person the person helps you carry something a long distance, and you know, it kind of it there's a bond there that you realize. I guess that's kind of the testing and the fracturing thing, if you if, if you don't test your friendship, if the first time you test your friendship is, Wednesday morning and after the election, and you're like, "You voted for who?" and it breaks, right? But just as testings and those rubbings together, I we always that's a good every guy likes to talk about the, oh, iron sharpens iron, right? But how often are you sharpening your iron around your other guys, like how
right.
often
The
are
second
you
there's a
push
disagreement, then
I mean, I
they
know you
flip out.
personally don't suffer from that problem because you get that look on your face some days when I know you're just being cantankerous, and it's pretty funny. But how often do you really like rub up against the stuff that you know it's gonna sharpen you, but you don't want to rub that rust off that you've built up to protect you. You don't want people to see that bare metal that's underneath there.
No, and it usually comes, from my demeanor. It usually comes with a lashback of some sort of an intimidating statement or some sort of um, you know, a puffing of the chest to get somebody to basically stray away. Don't go there is what I'm saying, and I've tried to avoid that, in the recent years. And it is interesting because I think you probably used to be the same way. What do you think happened that, like, for real, what do you think happened that allowed you to be able to sit at a table sometimes that we could probably honestly say is filled with idiots in our mind, but to listen?
Probably
It's
in my
really,
case,
really
probably old
hard.
age. My case is probably old age. You know,
You can't
and
swing
just
on them
realizing,
anymore,
like,
so you might as well at least listen.
at some point it's a very small world. Like, there's a lot of people, but it's really a very small world. There's very, like, I think in your lifetime you are going to encounter such a small segment of humanity. There's like what? I mean, eight is there like 8 billion people now? And you're going to
Yeah.
encounter such a small group, and the more of those people that you segment out, like, I'm not talking to that guy that's wearing that shirt, or that guy's got this hat, or I drove by Randy's house, I saw that sign in your yard. You start segmenting all those people out, and pretty soon, like, you're alone. I mean, it's like, and then you flip the script and you convince yourself, like, I don't need those people, right? And that leads right back around the circle to the first definition of just not showing up. Like, I'm not going to interact with that person. I'm just not gonna show up. Like, I won't have to deal with them. I won't lose the friendship, so I won't fail at the friendship, but you fail to even attempt the friendship, you know?
Yeah, definitely. That's that's spot on at the same time
Yeah. I
because
mean, it's our society, I mean, it's kind of funny, I have for most of my adult life, I've had pretty cantankerous political views that gets where I've always been very proud of the fact that people from both sides dislike me at some point of the year. And but
there's a
it's
badge of honor
easy,
there.
but it's shocking how fast people will drop you out of a group like the second they feel like you're not, man, if you're not on the team, you're out of here, and it's pretty scary. Like we jettison people so fast. We see people as so disposable.
Little minute items too, like you said. You know, just wearing the wrong type of hairstyle.
Right.
I think we did. It's just a lot more unsophisticated with the middle schoolers. You know, we probably do it a little more sophisticated, but barely. And yeah, we oust these guys, all of these, but I think it's something that everybody has to wrestle with. It's the fear of the other be dangerous to me. We have
Right.
uh, a historical aspect of means danger.
Right.
I don't think it's I think it's worth that meaning. We should respect it. We should respect the new culture meeting the new culture, and see that, yeah, if treated um hastily, it could be dangerous. If you to a dangerous, chaotic life, possibly filled with disease. And so we wrestle that, being open to the other, but in so many ways, in so many small ways, we could get better at investigating and just exploring other people. And that, to me,
Mhm.
I've said it, beat the drum so many times. F3 has been so powerful for me to be able to hang around with people I don't like. And I don't mean that like everybody in F3 I don't like. No, it's very few. But it's taught me to understand that, oh, that person has a place here.
Yeah.
And their place is, even though they vote or they, say those things, yada yada yada. It's been so
Yeah.
powerful for me. That and church. It's I made a post about this the other day. It's so true. I stole it from a podcast, don't know where, but community, it's our antidote to bullshit. We bullshit ourselves so easily. And we say this, say that, and it's not until we actually engage with a community and we realize, yeah, no, I was the one actually bullshitting, and what
Mhm.
such a ridiculous statement or such a ridiculous behavior. No, we don't tolerate it, and we stamp it out. And it's that process is to be respected. Again, that's the other end of how that community will not tolerate, if done correctly. It won't tolerate your BS.
Right.
That's
That's
the
where
stuff
the
for you to do while you take a shower and preach to the choir. And
that's where the guardrails come in, right? The your group has to set down the guardrails or else you don't know where the road's at sometimes. But yeah, that's a good thing. A lot of times I think again, traveling a lot when I was younger, you always hear, I can distinctly remember people always tell me, don't go to France. they hate Americans in France, blah blah blah. And like I played football in France, and it was, made some of the best friends of my life, and like never, never really had a bad experience with anybody just because of who I was. It was, and it was just like once you went there and you were like, and then you hear people say that later, and you're like, well, that hasn't been my experience. And I think that is where the community comes in, and a lot of things like now with people are being really fearful about stuff, and it's like, you know, I I talk to those people all the time, and I have never heard a single one of them say something like that. So maybe you should, get off your little keyboard and go outside and have a conversation, or, you know, I think it is a good thing. It's because community, is it's like everything else, I guess. If you're the only one doing it, you're the best, you're the rightest, you're the smartest, and then you go and you meet somebody else and they have a different opinion, and you have to decide, do I accept their opinion, or you know what I mean, or it's
Yeah, and that's a wow. They did it
right.
better than I. Point actually would be effective. And you can, like you said, you can see when people double down, just continually be ignorant about it, and actually, that's like swallowing their own poison. But
Yeah.
that that gives evidence, I think, to how tough it is to actually let a little bit of your previous beliefs burn off, and to assume the belief or the actions of somebody else that proved to be more beneficial. 39 years, I didn't quite understand that, especially if it's a happens to be a younger, perceived, uh, not as qualified, or however it be, individual.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a dangerous
Cool,
thing,
man.
is considering truth to be, if you consider the source, as part of whether you decide you're going to accept the information. That's a big, you know,
Well, especially if it's truthful on your own definition. Like, that what they just said is right and better than the way you can now change the oil 10 times faster on your truck because of that tip that guy just gave you. You can either
more.
A, accept that, and you know it in your gut that it's true and right. That's the difference, is when you still decide to double down against the truth. And you can tell it's a satanic behavior. It's irrational, and
Yeah, it's
it just doesn't make
pride's the
sense. But
pride's the word you're looking for.
thank you. You bet. Cool,
All right.
dude. Well, hey, let's wrap it up for the day. I really appreciate you.
All right, no
Time
problem.
to continue stirring up these thoughts. It's awesome.
All right. Good times. Love you, man. Have a great day.
All right. Love you too, buddy. Have a good one.
All right.
See you.
I gotta figure out how to hang up.
Bye.